The donkey had been acting strange for 3 days, but Mara Hollis didn't think much of it first. Animals had their moods, their instincts, their ways of reading the world that humans had long forgotten. But when Jasper, her stubborn 15-year-old companion who'd carried her through 8 winters of mountain solitude, planted his hooves at the stream's edge and refused to drink, she knew something was wrong. The water looked clear. It ran over smooth stones the way it always had, tumbling down from the high country with the same crystalline purity that had kept her alive all these years. But Jasper wouldn't touch it. He backed away, ears flat, nostrils flared with something that looked like fear. Mara knelt by the water, dipping her fingers into the current. Cold, clean, no unusual smell. She brought her hand to her lips, tasting nothing but the familiar mineral bite of snowmelt. Yet Jasper stamped anxiously behind her, refusing to come closer. "What is it, old man?" she whispered, straightening slowly. "What do you know that I don't?" The morning air carried the scent of pine and distant frost. Mara had lived alone on this ridge for 12 years, ever since the night her husband's body was carried down from the north face in a canvas bag. 12 years of chopping wood, hauling water, surviving winters that buried the world in silence. She'd learned to trust the mountain's rhythms, and she'd learned to trust Jasper. If he wouldn't drink, there was a reason. She followed his gaze upstream, scanning the banks for dead animals, for unusual debris, for anything that might explain his reaction. Nothing. Just smooth stones, scattered willows, an eternal rush of water. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I got something extra special saved for tomorrow. Mara spent the rest of the morning watching Jasper pace the clearing, returning again and again to the stream's edge only to retreat. His behavior gnawed at her. In 12 years, she'd never seen him refuse water when he was thirsty. His flanks were dry, his breathing heavy from their morning trek. He needed to drink. By afternoon, frustration gave way to curiosity. She grabbed a shovel from the shed, more to satisfy her own unease than from any real plan. If something was contaminating the water upstream, she needed to know. She couldn't afford to lose her only reliable water source this close to winter. She walked upstream, Jasper following at a cautious distance. The creek narrowed as it climbed, cutting through granite and ancient sediment. Mara moved slowly, studying every bend, every pool. The donkey's agitation increased the farther they went, his ears swiveling nervously. Then she saw it, a slight discoloration in the bank. Nothing dramatic, just a patch where the soil looked darker, denser, almost metallic. She might have walked past it 100 times before, without noticing. But today, with Jasper's fear sharpening her senses, it stood out like a wound. Mara set down her shovel and knelt, brushing away loose dirt with her fingers. The soil beneath was hard-packed, compressed in a way that felt deliberate, not natural erosion, something else. Her heart began to pound. She started digging. The first hour yielded only dirt and frustration. Mara's hands blistered despite her worn gloves, her shoulders aching from the repetitive motion. Jasper watched from a safe distance, still refusing to approach the water. The sun climbed higher, warming her back as she worked. Then her shovel struck something solid. Not rock. Metal. Mara's breath caught. She cleared the dirt more carefully now, revealing a dull gray surface. Smooth. Manufactured. Her pulse quickened as she traced the edges of what appeared to be a large metal box, maybe 3 feet across, buried horizontally in the stream bank. "What the hell?" she whispered. Jasper brayed once, sharp and anxious. Mara sat back on her heels, staring at her discovery. This wasn't old mining equipment. She knew that scrap by heart, the rusted remnants of a century-old industry. This was something else. The metal showed no corrosion despite being buried near water. The surface was too smooth, too deliberately crafted. She dug faster now, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. The box extended deeper than she'd expected, its edges sealed tight. No hinges visible, no obvious way to open it. Just smooth metal panels fitted together with precision that felt wrong for something buried in a creek bank in the middle of nowhere. By the time she'd fully exposed it, The sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks. Mara's clothes were soaked with sweat despite the mountain chill. She circled the box slowly, running her hands along its surface. There a seam, barely visible, but there, and next to it, a series of shallow indentations in the metal, not random, deliberate, a pattern. Her fingers traced the grooves, and something inside the box hummed. Mara jerked her hand back, heart lurching. The hum faded immediately, but the sensation lingered, a vibration she'd felt through her fingertips, traveling up her arm like a warning or an invitation. Jasper had backed even farther away, his eyes wide. "You knew," Mara said, looking at him. "You knew something was here." The donkey didn't answer, but his fear was confirmation enough. Mara returned her attention to the box. The logical part of her brain screamed warnings. Unknown objects buried in remote locations were never good news. They were hidden for reasons, dangerous reasons. The smart thing would be to cover it back up, walk away, forget she'd ever found it. But Mara had spent 12 years forgetting things. Forgetting the sound of her husband's laugh. Forgetting what it felt like to have purpose beyond survival. Forgetting that she'd once been a woman who asked questions instead of hiding from answers. Her fingers found the indentations again. This time, the hum grew stronger. The metal warmed beneath her touch, not hot, but alive with energy that shouldn't exist in dead steel. The seam she'd found began to glow faintly, a thin line of light spreading across the box's surface like veins awakening. Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to pull away. Every instinct told her to run, but her hands wouldn't move. The light intensified, branching into intricate patterns that reminded her of circuit boards, of maps, of something that existed between technology and art. A soft click echoed from inside the box. Then another. The seam widened. Mara stumbled backward as the lid began to rise, moving on its own, powered by mechanisms she couldn't see. Cold air rushed out. Not the musty smell of long burial, but something sharp and chemical, like ozone after lightning. The lid stopped halfway open, revealing darkness inside. Mara's hands trembled as she reached for her flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the box's interior. She expected weapons, maybe, or old documents. Government secrets buried and forgotten. What she found instead stole her breath completely. Bundles. Dozens of them, wrapped in thick, waterproof material that crinkled when her flashlight touched it. She reached in slowly, pulling out the nearest bundle. It was heavy, denser than it looked. She unwrapped the outer layer carefully. Gold bars gleamed in the afternoon light. Not old, tarnished gold. Fresh, stamped, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Each bar the size of a brick, each one worth more than she'd earned in her entire life. And there were dozens of them. She counted quickly, 30 visible bundles, maybe more beneath. Her mind raced through calculations she barely understood. Market value. Wait, the sheer impossibility of this much wealth hidden in a stream bank on land she'd walked for 12 years without knowing. Jasper's fear suddenly made terrible sense. Animals sense danger better than humans. And this much gold, hidden this carefully, came with the kind of danger that destroyed lives. Mara's hands shook as she rewrapped the bar and placed it back inside. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Questions flooded her mind faster than she could process them. Who buried this? When? Why here? And most importantly, who else knew about it? She looked around the clearing, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. The trees seemed to lean closer, their shadows deeper than before. Every sound, every bird call, every rustle of wind felt like a warning. She needed to think, needed to understand what she'd found before anyone else discovered she'd found it. But standing here, staring at $50 million in stolen or hidden or laundered gold, thinking seemed impossible. Jasper brayed again, more urgent this time. Mara forced herself to focus. She couldn't leave the box open. Couldn't risk someone else finding it before she understood what it meant. She pressed her palm against the lid, and it responded immediately. Closed it with the same mechanical precision it had opened with. The light faded. The seam disappeared. Within seconds, the box looked like nothing more than a sealed metal container, inert and lifeless. But Mara knew better now. She grabbed her shovel and began covering it back up, working quickly as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Her mind spun with possibilities and fears. This gold represented freedom. Enough money to leave a mountain, to start over somewhere warm and safe, to never worry about winter again. It also represented danger. People didn't hide $50 million in gold and then forget about it. Someone knew it was here. Someone was looking for it. And if they found out she discovered it first, Mara packed the dirt down hard, smoothing the surface until it looked undisturbed. She scattered leaves and small stones across the area, erasing evidence of her digging. By the time she finished, darkness had settled across the valley. She stood slowly, every muscle aching. Jasper approached cautiously, still wary but no longer terrified now that the box was sealed again. "We need to go home," Mara whispered, more to herself than to him. "We need to think." The walk back to her cabin felt different. The familiar trail seemed darker, more threatening. Every shadow held potential danger. Every sound made her flinch. She kept expecting to hear footsteps behind her, to feel eyes watching from the trees. But the mountain remained silent. By the time she reached her cabin, a thin moon had risen over the eastern ridge. Mara lit the wood stove with trembling hands, fed Jasper, and collapsed into her worn chair by the window. She stared out the darkness, her mind refusing to quiet. $50 million. Hidden in her creek. Found because her donkey refused a drink. She thought about the years she'd spent barely scraping by. The winters when she'd burned furniture to stay warm. The summers when she'd lived on foraged berries. And the rare kindness of strangers. 12 years of isolation and poverty. And all that time, a fortune had been buried less than half a mile from her door. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Mara pulled out a worn notebook, the one where she kept records of weather patterns and wildlife movements, and began to write. She needed to document everything. The exact location, the appearance of the box, the symbols on the gold, everything she could remember before fear or doubt made her question her own memory. As she wrote, a single thought crystallized in her mind. She couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until she understood what she'd found and who it belonged to. Because the moment she revealed this discovery, her life would change forever. And she'd learned the hard way that change usually meant loss. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's walls. Jasper shifted restlessly in his shelter. Mara set down her pen and stared at the words she'd written. Gold. Hidden. Dangerous. 3 words that would define everything that came next. She closed the notebook and locked in the small safe where she kept her husband's wedding ring and the deed to her land, the only thing she owned that mattered. Then she sat in the darkness, listening to the mountain breathe, and wonder how long she had before the people who'd hidden that gold came looking for it. Sleep didn't come that night. Mara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling beams while her mind circled the same impossible questions. The wind had died completely, leaving a silence so profound she could hear her own heartbeat. Outside, not even the usual night sounds. No owls, no rustling pine needles, nothing. Just emptiness pressing against the windows like something waiting. By dawn, exhaustion had carved hollows under her eyes, but her thoughts had sharpened into something resembling a plan. She needed information. The gold bars had been stamped with symbols she didn't recognize. Not standard mint marks. Not anything she'd seen in the occasional news footage of bank vaults or treasury departments, which meant they were either very old or very illegal, or both. Mara dressed quickly, pulling on her cleanest flannel shirt and the jacket without visible patches. If she was going into town, something she avoided whenever possible, she needed to look normal, unremarkable, not like a woman who just discovered $50 million buried in her creek. Jasper watched her with dark, knowing eyes as she prepared to leave. "I'll be back before dark," she told him, scratching behind his ears. "And I promise, no more digging by the stream until I understand what we found." The donkey huffed softly, as if to say he'd been trying to warn her all along. The drive down the mountain took an hour on roads that barely deserved the name. Mara's ancient pickup truck rattled over ruts and washouts, the engine coughing at every steep grade. She hadn't been a ridgeline in 3 months, Hadn't talked to anyone but the occasional ranger or lost hiker in even longer. The town looked the same as always. A handful of weathered buildings clustered around a single main street. Tourism posters faded in shop windows. Local vehicles parked at angles that suggested people were in no hurry to leave. Population 847. According to the sign. Mara suspected that number was optimistic. She parked in front of the public library, a squat brick building that also housed the Historical Society and town records. If anyone would know about unusual gold discoveries or old mining claims in the area, it would be Eleanor Vance, the librarian who'd lived in Ridgeline for 60 years and seemed to know every secret the mountain held. The bell above the door chimed as Mara entered. The familiar smell of old books and lemon furniture polish washed over her. Eleanor looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her weathered face. "Mara Hollis," she said, her voice carrying equal parts warmth and concern. "I was beginning to think you'd become a complete hermit up there." Mara managed a small smile. "Just needed some research materials." Eleanor's sharp eyes studied her with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading people as easily as books. "Research on what exactly?" Mara had prepared for this question during the drive. "Mining history. Old claims around the Upper Creek valleys. I found some interesting rock formations on my property and wondered if anyone had surveyed that area before." It wasn't quite a lie, just a careful truth wrapped in misdirection. Eleanor's expression shifted to something more interested. "Upper Creek valleys, you said? Near your place." "About half a mile upstream from my cabin." The librarian stood slowly, moving to her filing cabinet in the corner. There were extensive surveys done in the 70s. Government teams, independent prospectors, even some university researchers. The whole region was considered promising for mineral deposits. She pulled out several manila folders, laying them on a nearby table. But most of the claims were abandoned by the mid-'80s. Something about unstable geology and contaminated groundwater. Mara's pulse quickened. Contaminated how? Nobody ever said exactly. The reports were sealed, and the teams pulled out practically overnight. Eleanor tapped one of the folders. "Left behind a lot of equipment, too. I remember my late husband complaining about finding survey markers and drilling sites all over the mountain." Mara opened the first folder, scanning yellow documents filled with geological terminology she barely understood. Survey maps showed her property, or at least a general area, marked with dozens of small symbols. Test sites, drilling location, sample coordinates. "Did they find anything valuable?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Eleanor shrugged. "If they did, they kept it quiet. But there were rumors." She lowered her voice, even though they were alone in the library. "People said the government teams weren't looking for minerals. They were looking for something someone had already hidden up there." Mara's hand still on the papers. "Hidden? Like what?" Nobody knew for sure. But one of the surveyors got drunk at Mackenzie's bar one night and started talking about sealed containers. So they'd found evidence of deliberate burial sites, not natural deposits. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. He disappeared a week later. Quit his job, moved out of state without notice. His wife said men in dark suits had visited their house. A cold sensation crawled down Mara's spine. When was this? 1978? April, I think. Mara pulled out her notebook and began copying information from the folders. Dates, names, coordinates. Eleanor watched silently, her expression unreadable. "You found something up there, didn't you?" the librarian said quietly. Mara's pen froze mid-word. She looked up, meeting Eleanor's knowing gaze. "I found something," Mara admitted carefully. "But I don't know what it is yet. And until I do, I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention this conversation to anyone." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "People up here know how to keep secrets, Mara. God knows this mountain has enough of them." She paused. "But be careful. Whatever those government teams were looking for, if you found it, you're not the only one who'll be interested." "Who else would know about it?" "Hard to say. But there's a man who comes through town every few months. Stays at the motel, asks questions at the diner, drives up the old mining roads." Eleanor's voice dropped even lower. He always asks about property owners in the upper valleys, about who's living where, who's died, who's sold their land. Mara's mouth went dry. What does he look like? 50s, maybe? Gray hair, expensive boots, drives a black SUV. Polite enough, but there's something cold about him, like he's looking at you and seeing something else entirely. Has he been here recently? Eleanor crossed to her desk, flipping through a calendar. 3 weeks ago. Stayed 2 nights. Asked the same questions he always does, then left. She looked up. But he'll be back. He always comes back. Mara gathered the folders, her hands trembling slightly. Can I make copies of these? Take the originals, Eleanor said. Nobody's asked for them in 20 years. If you need them, they're yours. Thank you. Eleanor touched Mara's arm gently. Whatever you found up there, think very carefully before you tell anyone else. Sometimes the mountain gives us things we're meant to keep secret. Mara nodded, unable to trust her voice. She left the library with the folders tucked under her arm, her mind racing. A man asking questions. Government teams looking for hidden containers. Survey operations shut down without explanation. Every piece of information made the gold in her creek feel more dangerous, more deliberately concealed. She needed to know what those symbols meant. Her next stop was Gerald Moss, the town's only jeweler and one of the few people in Ridgeline with expertise in precious metals. His shop occupied a narrow storefront between a hardware store and an abandoned real estate office. A bell jangled as she entered. Gerald looked up from his workbench, magnifying goggles pushed up on his forehead. He was in his 70s, with hands that trembled slightly from decades of detail work, but eyes that remained sharp. Mara, he said with genuine pleasure, haven't seen you in years. I need your expertise on something, she said, pulling out her notebook. She'd sketched the symbols from the gold bars as accurately as she could remember. These markings, do they look familiar to you? Gerald studied the drawings, his expression growing more puzzled. Where did you see these? Does it matter? He looked at her seriously. It might. Mara hesitated. On some old metal I found. Could be mining era, could be newer. I'm trying to determine what it is before I decide what to do with it. Gerald returned his attention to the sketches, pulling down a reference book from his cluttered shelf. He flipped through pages of mint marks and refinery stamps, comparing them to Mara's drawings. These aren't standard marks, he said finally. Not from any official mint I recognize. But the style. He tapped one of the symbols. This looks like a private refinery mark. Very high-end operations use them. The kind that process gold for wealthy clients who want discretion. Discretion or secrecy? Sometimes they're the same thing. He pulled out another book, this one older and more worn. There was a private refinery operation in the 80s. Completely off the books. They processed gold for clients who didn't want their transactions traced. Drug money, embezzled funds, stolen bullion. He pointed to one of Mara's sketches. This symbol looks similar to their marking system. Mara's stomach tightened. What happened to them? Federal raid in 1986. The facility was destroyed, records seized. But rumor was they'd already moved most of their inventory before the authorities arrived. Millions in untraceable gold just vanished. How much gold are we talking about? Gerald shrugged. The estimates varied wildly. Some said 20 million. Others said triple that. He looked at her intently. Why are you asking about this, Mara? She closed her notebook. Just curious about local history. That's not local history. That's federal crime history. His voice dropped. If you found something connected to that refinery, you need to be very careful. The people who ran it didn't just disappear. They reorganized. And they've been looking for their missing gold for 40 years. Mara felt her blood run cold. How do you know that? Because one of them came into the shop 5 years ago with a gold bar asking me to trace its origin. When I told him it looked like black market refining, he got very interested in whether I'd seen any similar pieces. Gerald's hands tightened on his workbench. I told him no. I lied because something in his eyes told me the truth would be dangerous. What did he look like? Gray hair, expensive clothes, dead eyes. Gerald paused. He asked about property owners in the mountain valleys, about who lived where nobody could find them. It was the same man Eleanor had described, the man who came to town asking questions, the man who was still looking. Mara stood abruptly. "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate your help." "Mara," his voice stopped her at the door. "Whatever you found, be smart. Some treasures aren't worth the cost of keeping them." She nodded without turning around and stepped back into the cold afternoon air. The pieces were fitting together now, forming a picture she didn't like. The gold in her creek wasn't some random lost fortune. It was deliberately hidden, part of a much larger theft or operation that had gone wrong decades ago. And someone was still actively searching for it. Someone who knew roughly where it was. Someone who would eventually find it. Mara sat in her truck, hands gripping the steering wheel. She had 3 options. She could report the gold to the authorities, turn it over, wash her hands of it, let the government sort out the legal complications. But that meant losing any chance of using it to change her life, and it meant drawing attention to herself and her property in ways that might never go away. She could try to move the gold, hide it somewhere else, keep it secret until she figured out how to safely claim or sell it. But moving $50 million in gold without being noticed seemed impossible, and keeping it hidden meant living with constant fear of discovery. Or she could try to understand the full story, find out exactly who had buried it, why, and what had happened to them. Knowledge was power, and right now, she had very little of either. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, surprised. She rarely got calls, and her service on the mountain was unreliable at best. A known number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the accept button. "Hello." Silence on the other end. Then a man's voice, smooth and measured. "Is this Mara Hollis?" Every muscle in her body tensed. "Who's asking?" "My name is David Crane. I represent certain interests in the Ridgeline area. I understand you've been asking questions about mining history and geological surveys." Mara's heart hammered. "Who told you that?" "Small towns have very few secrets, Ms. Hollis. Especially when someone breaks a 12-year pattern of isolation to visit the library and the jeweler on the same day." A pause. "I'd like to speak with you. In person." "I'm not interested." "I think you are, because I have information about what's buried on your property. Information you'll want before you make any irrevocable decisions." Mara's throat went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." His voice carried a hint of amusement. "But I'll be at Mackenzie's bar tomorrow at noon. If you'd like to hear the full story of what you found in your creek, I suggest you join me." The line went dead. Mara stared at the phone, her hands trembling. He knew, not just that she'd been asking questions. He knew about the creek, about what she'd found, which meant he'd been watching her property. Probably for years, waiting for someone to discover what he couldn't find himself. She started the truck with shaking hands and pulled onto the mountain road. The drive home felt endless, every curve revealing potential danger, every shadow hiding possible threats. By the time she reached her cabin, dusk had settled across the valley like a held breath. Jasper greeted her anxiously, sensing her fear. She fed him with automatic movements, her mind elsewhere. Then she locked herself inside the cabin and pulled out the folders Eleanor had given her. She spread the survey maps across her kitchen table, studying them under lamplight. The coordinates marked on the old documents aligned almost perfectly with her creek. Multiple drilling sites, soil samples, radiation testing. Radiation testing? Mara's blood ran cold. Why would government surveyors be testing for radiation in a remote mountain creek? Unless they weren't looking for gold at all. Unless they were looking for something else. Something that had been hidden alongside the gold or used to conceal it. Her hands trembled as she flipped through more documents. One page caught her eye. A handwritten note stapled to a geological report. Container located April 12, 78. Contents match description. Recommend immediate extraction and containment. Do not open in field. Below it, someone had scrawled in red ink, "Extraction team compromised. Container resealed and relocated. New coordinates classified. Operation terminated." Mara read the words 3 times, trying to understand. The government teams had found something in 1978, something they considered dangerous enough to extract immediately. But the extraction had failed, the container had been moved, and the operation had been shut down, which meant the gold she'd found might be the relocated container. Or it might be something else entirely. Her phone buzzed again. She jumped, heart-lurching. Another unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a different voice, younger, urgent. "Is this Mara Hollis?" "Who is this?" "My name is Ben Garrett. I'm calling about your property." A pause. "I know you found a container." "I know, because I helped bury it there in 1978. Mara's world tilted. "What?" "I don't have much time. They're listening to everything. But you need to know, what you found isn't just gold. It's evidence. Evidence that could destroy very powerful people if it ever surfaces." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't meet with Crane tomorrow. Don't trust anything he tells you. And whatever you do, don't open that container again. Some of the bars are marked with radiation signatures. They were used to track shipments of weapons-grade material." The line went dead. Mara sat frozen, the phone still pressed her ear. Radiation signatures. Weapons-grade material. Evidence that could destroy powerful people. She thought she'd found a fortune. She'd actually found something far more dangerous. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin walls. Jasper brayed once, sharp and afraid. And somewhere in the darkness, Mara heard the distant sound of an engine, a vehicle climbing the mountain road toward her cabin, coming closer. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories like this one. Mara killed the lights immediately, plunging the cabin into darkness. She moved to the window, pressing herself against the wall where she could see out without being seen. The engine's sound grew louder. Not her imagination, not the wind. A real vehicle, climbing the narrow track that led to her property. Headlights swept across the trees. Her heart hammered, so hard she could feel in her throat. She'd lived here 12 years without unexpected visitors. Nobody came up this far unless they were lost or looking for her specifically. And given the phone call she'd just received, this wasn't someone looking for directions. The vehicle, a dark SUV, exactly like Eleanor had described, pulled into a clearing and stopped. The engine cut off. Silence filled the space where the sound had been, thick and expectant. A man stepped out. Even in the darkness, Mara could make out expensive boots, a long coat, silver hair catching moonlight. David Crane, the man who'd called her, the man who'd been asking questions in town for years. He stood beside his vehicle, not approaching the cabin, just waiting, as if he knew she was watching, as if he wanted her to see him. Jasper stamped nervously in his shelter. The sound echoed across the clearing. Crane turned toward the donkey, then back to the cabin. "Ms. Hollis," he called out, his voice carrying easily in the mountain quiet. "I know you're there. I'm not here to threaten you. I just want to talk." Mara stayed silent, pressed against the wall. "I know you found the container," Crane continued. "I know you opened it. And I know you spent today asking questions you shouldn't have asked." He took a few steps closer to the cabin. "But I'm not your enemy. The people who called you tonight, they're the ones you should be afraid of." Mara's mind raced. Ben Garrett had warned her not to trust Crane. But Crane was here in person, while Garrett was just a voice on the phone claiming to have buried the gold 40 years ago. "I'm going to leave something on your porch," Crane said. "Information you'll want to read. Then I'm going to leave. But tomorrow, when you've had time to think, I hope you'll meet me. Because the story you've stumbled into is bigger and more dangerous than you can imagine." He approached the cabin slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Mara watched him climb the 3 steps to her porch and set something down, a manila envelope thick with papers. Then he retreated to his SUV. "Noon tomorrow at Mackenzie's," he called out. "Come alone. And don't bring the gold with you. It's safer where it is for now." He climbed into his vehicle and started the engine. The headlights swept across the cabin one more time. Then he was gone, the sound of his engine fading down the mountain. Mara waited 10 minutes before moving. She checked every window, scanned the tree line for any sign of other vehicles or people watching. Nothing, just darkness and the familiar shapes of her property. Finally, she opened the front door and grabbed the envelope, pulling it inside quickly before locking the door again. She lit a single candle, enough to read by without making the cabin too visible from outside, and opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, old, grainy, but clear enough to make her hands shake. The first showed a group of men standing beside a large metal container, the same container she'd found in her creek. Behind them, mountains she recognized, her mountains. The photo was dated April 1978. The second showed the same container being loaded into a truck, covered with tarps. Armed guards surrounded it. The third made her stomach drop. It showed the container open, revealing not just gold bars, but something else. Document cases, sealed metal tubes, what looked like scientific equipment. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to the photo. Operation Pinecone. April-June 1978. Extraction of contaminated materials from classified testing site. Total value: $47 million in gold used to weight containers, plus documents detailing weapons testing protocols from 1960 to 1975. Container 7 went missing during transport, never recovered. Mara flipped through more photos. One showed a man she recognized from the group shot, younger, but definitely the same person who'd identified himself on the phone as Ben Garrett. He was labeled as security team leader. Another photo showed David Crane, 40 years younger, labeled as Federal Observer. The final document was a declassified memo, heavily redacted but still readable. Container 7 remains unaccounted for. Recommend terminating search operations. Risk of public exposure too high. Contents include documentation of unauthorized weapons testing, human subjects research, and financial transactions involving redacted. Loss represents significant security liability. Recommend permanent classification of all related materials. Mara set the papers down, her hands trembling. She hadn't found a simple fortune. She'd found a government cover-up, evidence of illegal testing, unauthorized research, crimes that powerful people had spent 40 years trying to bury. The gold was just the weight. The real value and the real danger was in the documents sealed inside that container. Her phone buzzed again. This time she recognized a number. It was Ben Garrett calling back. She answered. "I got the photos." "From Crane?" His voice sounded strained. "Then you know he's not who he claims to be. He wasn't just an observer. He was the one who ordered the container hidden instead of recovered. Why would he do that? Because he's named in those documents. His whole career, everything he built after 1978, was funded by money and influence from people who needed those files to stay hidden. If that container is ever open officially, dozens of people go to prison, including him." Mara's mind raced. So he wants to recover it quietly. Destroy the documents, keep the gold. Exactly. But there are others who want those documents public. Whistleblowers, victims' families, journalists. They've been searching for proof of what happened for decades. If you turn that container over to them instead of Crane, you become a hero or a target. Garrett's silence confirmed her fear. "There's another option," he said finally. "You could destroy everything. Melt the gold down, burn the documents, erase all evidence that Container 7 was ever found. Live your life in peace. And let all those crimes stay hidden? Is exposing them worth dying for?" Mara looked around her small cabin, at the life she'd built from grief and isolation, at the 12 years she'd spent hiding from the world, convinced she had nothing left to fight for. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Well, you need to decide fast. Because Crane isn't the only one who knows you found it. By now, at least 3 different groups are moving toward your location. Some want the evidence public, some want it destroyed, and some just want the gold." He paused. "You have maybe 48 hours before this mountain becomes very crowded and very dangerous. What should I do? Run. Take what you can carry and disappear. let them fight over an empty hole. Mara looked out the window at the dark shapes of the mountains she'd called home for so long. Running meant abandoning everything. Again, starting over somewhere new, with nothing but clothes on her back and whatever she could fit in her truck. But staying meant war, a war she didn't understand, fought by people with resources and ruthlessness she couldn't match. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long." The line went dead. Mara sat in the darkness, surrounded by evidence of crimes committed before she was born, holding knowledge that powerful people would kill, protect, or expose. The gold in her creek had seemed like salvation when she'd first found it. Now it felt like a curse. Jasper brayed softly outside, reminding her she wasn't completely alone. She stood slowly, making a decision. She couldn't run, not yet, not without understanding exactly what she was running from. And she couldn't destroy the evidence without knowing what crimes it documented, what victims deserved justice, which meant she needed to see those documents for herself. Tomorrow, before meeting with Crane or anyone else, she would go back to the creek. She would open that container one more time, and she would read every page of evidence sealed inside. Then she would decide what kind of person she wanted to be, the kind who ran, or the kind who fought. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. Mara had spent the night cataloging her options, each one worse than the last. By the time pale light filtered through her cabin windows, she'd made her decision. She needed to see what was inside that container. All of it, not just the gold. The documents Ben Garrett had mentioned. The evidence that made this discovery more than just buried treasure. She dressed in layers, preparing for hours in the cold. Jasper watched her with wary eyes as she gathered supplies. Gloves, tools, a tarp to work under, and her old Polaroid camera. If she was going to open that container again, she needed her own documentation, her own insurance. The walk to the creek felt different in daylight. Every sound seemed amplified. Branches creaking, snow sliding from pine boughs, the distant call of ravens. Mara scanned the tree line constantly, expecting to see vehicles or people watching. But the mountain remained empty, holding its secrets close. When she reached the burial site, she stopped, studying the ground carefully. The dirt she'd replaced yesterday looked undisturbed. No footprints except her own fading tracks from the day before. If anyone else had come looking, they hadn't found it yet. She began digging again, working quickly despite her trembling hands. The shovel bit into frozen earth, each stroke bringing her closer to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Within 40 minutes, she'd exposed the metal container again. This time, when her fingers found the indentations, she didn't hesitate. The box hummed to life beneath her touch, the seams glowing with that same eerie light. The lid opened smoothly, revealing the bundles of gold bars she'd seen before. But now she looked deeper. Beneath the gold, wrapped in heavy waterproof material, she found what she'd been told to expect. Document cases. 3 of them, sealed with military-grade locks. And beside them, metal tubes marked with radiation warning symbols and serial numbers. Mara's breath caught. The tubes looked like something from a Cold War bunker. Official, dangerous, wrong. She didn't touch them. Instead, she focused on the document cases, pulling one out carefully and setting it on the tarp she'd spread beside the container. The lock was old but still solid. She used her multi-tool to work at it, patience overriding urgency. After 10 minutes of careful manipulation, the lock clicked open. Inside, she found file folders. Dozens of them, each labeled with dates, locations, and project names that meant nothing to her. She pulled out the first folder, hands shaking, and began to read. What she found made her stomach turn. The documents detailed a weapons testing program run in these mountains from 1962 to 1975. Not just conventional weapons, chemical agents, biological materials, radiation exposure experiments. The test subjects weren't soldiers or volunteers. They were locals, people from Ridgeline and surrounding communities, people who'd been told they were receiving medical treatment or participating in health surveys, people who'd gotten sick and died without ever knowing why. Mara flipped through page after page of clinical observations, exposure logs, mortality rates, names she recognized from town, families that had lost multiple members to cancer, children who developed rare illnesses, clusters of diseases that had never been explained. One document caught her eye. A handwritten memo dated June 1974. Subject response to compound 7 exceeds projections. Recommend expanding test pool to include children ages 5 to 12. Local hospital has been briefed and will cooperate with covered diagnosis protocols. Estimated casualties, 15 to 20% over 5-year period. Acceptable losses given strategic value of data. Mara's vision blurred. Acceptable losses. They'd poisoned children deliberately and called their deaths acceptable. She photographed every page with her Polaroid, working methodically despite the rage building in her chest. This was why the container had been hidden. This was why powerful people wanted it destroyed, not just to protect careers or reputations, to hide mass murder. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Multiple people moving through the trees toward her location. Mara's heart lurched. She shoved the documents back into the case, lowered it into the container, and closed the lid. It sealed immediately, the light fading, but she left the Polaroid scattered on the tarp. Dozens of photos of evidence that would condemn everyone involved. She grabbed the photos, stuffing them into her jacket pockets, just as 3 figures emerged from the trees. The first was David Crane, looking calm and composed despite the rough terrain. Behind him came 2 younger men in tactical gear. Not police, not military, but something that suggested both. Private security. The kind with no badges and no accountability. Crane's eyes went immediately to the freshly dug hole, then to the container barely visible beneath loose dirt. "Ms. Hollis," he said quietly, "I had hoped you'd wait until our meeting." Mara stood slowly, positioning herself between Crane and the container. "I don't take orders from people who poison children." His expression didn't change. "I see you've been reading. That's unfortunate." Unfortunate. Mara's voice shook with fury. "You murdered people, families, kids who trusted doctors and nurses who were killing them slowly." "I didn't murder anyone," Crane said calmly. "I was barely 20 years old when those tests were conducted. I had no authority, no knowledge of what was happening. But you knew afterward, and you helped hide it. I helped prevent panic. Chaos. Do you have any idea what would have happened if this information had gone public in 1978? The lawsuits, the hysteria, the complete collapse of trust in government institutions." "Good," Mara spat. "They deserved collapse." Crane sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. "The world doesn't work on deserves, Ms. Hollis. It works on pragmatism. Those tests, however unethical, produce data that help develop treatments for radiation exposure, medical knowledge that has saved thousands of lives since then. That doesn't justify." "I'm not asking for justification. I'm asking for realism." He gestured to the container. "That evidence is 40 years old. Everyone directly responsible is dead. The victims are dead. The program ended decades ago. Exposing it now serves no purpose except destroying the careers of people who had nothing to do with the original crimes, and enriching people who helped cover them up." Crane's jaw tightened. "I'm offering you $10 million for that container. Cash, untraceable, enough to start a new life anywhere you want. Blood money. Smart money. Think about it, Mara. You live alone on a mountain, barely surviving. Winter's coming. You have no family, no support system, no one who would miss you if something happened." His voice dropped. "Take the money. Walk away. Let the past stay buried." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mara's hand moved to her jacket pocket, feeling the Polaroids hidden there, her insurance policy, her proof that she'd seen the evidence. "No," she said. Crane studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded to the men behind him. They moved fast, spreading out to flank her. Mara backed toward the container, her mind racing. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated on her own property with no help coming. "Don't make this difficult," Crane said. "My associates will retrieve the container. You'll take the money, and we'll all walk away from this. And if I refuse, his expression turned cold. Then you become another tragic mountain accident. Woman found frozen in her cabin. Sad but not surprising, given your isolated lifestyle. Mara's pulse hammered. She was running out of options. Out of time. Then Jasper's bray echoed across the clearing. Sharp and urgent. Everyone turned. The donkey stood at the tree lean, ears forward, staring at something behind Crane and his men. More people emerged from the forest. 6 of them, led by a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that could cut glass. She wore civilian clothes, but moved with military precision. The people with her carried cameras, recording equipment, and what looked like official documentation. David Crane, the woman said, her voice carrying authority that made even Crane's security team hesitate. Step away from the container. You're under federal investigation. Crane's face went pale. Agent Morrison, this is outside your jurisdiction. Not anymore. She held up a badge. FBI. As of 6 hours ago, Operation Pinecone was declassified. The files you've been hiding for 40 years are now subject to criminal investigation, and you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal federal crimes, and accessory to murder after fact. Mara's breath caught. Ben Garrett. He'd said there were people who wanted the evidence public. He must have contacted them, told them where to find her. Crane's security team reached for weapons, but Morrison's people were faster. Guns appeared, aimed with professional precision. Don't, Morrison said calmly. Your employer doesn't pay enough for you to die protecting evidence of mass murder. The security team froze, then slowly raised their hands. Morrison approached Mara, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Hollis? I'm Special Agent Catherine Morrison. I've been investigating Operation Pinecone for 15 years. May I see what you found? Mara's hands shook as she pulled out the Polaroids. Morrison examined them carefully, her jaw tightening with each image. Jesus, she whispered, you found the missing documentation, the proof we've been searching for. She looked at Mara with something like gratitude. Do you understand what this means? We can finally get justice for the victims, hold people accountable. What about him? Mara gestured to Crane. He'll face trial, along with everyone else who helped cover this up. Morrison signaled to her team. Secure the container. Document everything. I want this processed by the book. No shortcuts, no mistakes. 2 of Morrison's team moved past Mara to the container, working with careful precision to extract it from the ground. Crane watched in silence, his expression empty, defeated. Ms. Hollis, Morrison said quietly, I know this has been traumatic, but you've done something extraordinary. You've given voices back to people who died thinking no one would ever know what was done to them. Mara's throat tightened. What happens now? Now we build a case, document the evidence, contact victims' families, and make sure the people responsible face consequences. Morrison paused. There will be media attention, congressional hearings. Your life is going to change significantly. I just wanted to understand why my donkey wouldn't drink from the creek. Morrison smiled faintly. Sometimes the smallest questions lead to the biggest answers. The next few hours passed in a blur. Morrison's team worked with methodical efficiency, photographing the site, extracting the container, securing every piece of evidence. Crane and his security team were taken into custody, read their rights, and removed from the property in unmarked vehicles. Mara sat on a fallen log, watching the organized chaos, feeling disconnected from her own body. Jasper stood nearby, finally calm now that the danger had passed. When the work was finished, Morrison approached again. We'll need you to come to Denver tomorrow, she said. Give a formal statement. Work with our forensic accountants on the gold. Help us understand the chain of events that led to your discovery. The gold, Mara said slowly. What happens to it? Morrison hesitated. That's complicated. Technically, it was stolen federal property. But given how it was used and the circumstances of its burial, she glanced at her notes. There's precedent for whistleblower rewards in cases like this. The value of the evidence you provided could qualify you for a significant recovery payment. How significant? potentially several $1 million, plus protection, relocation assistance if you want it, and legal support for any civil suits that emerge. Morrison met her eyes. You won't be poor again, Miss Hollis. That much I can promise. Mara looked around at the mountain that had been her home for 12 years. The place she'd fled to when grief made the world unbearable. The isolation that had protected her and trapped her in equal measure. Can I stay here? She asked. On my land. If you want to. But I should warn you, the media attention will be intense for a while. People will want interviews, photographs, your story. It might be easier to start over somewhere new. Mara thought about that. A new place, a new life, the freedom to go anywhere, be anyone. But this mountain had given her more than isolation. It had given her purpose. It had trusted her with secrets that mattered. And walking away felt like abandonment. I'll stay, she said. At least for now. Morrison nodded. Then we'll make sure you're protected. Regular patrols, security systems, whatever you need. As Morrison's team finished packing up, Mara walked back to the creek, where she'd found container. The hole was empty now, just disturbed earth and a faint depression where something heavy had rested for 40 years. She knelt, running her fingers through the cold dirt, thinking about the people who died here, the children who played in these streams, drunk this water, breathed this air, never knowing they were being poisoned deliberately. They would have justice now. Not the justice of seeing their killers punished in life. Most were long dead. But the justice of truth, of names spoken aloud, of crimes acknowledged instead of hidden. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. 6 months later. The cabin looked different now. New windows, repaired roof, a proper generator, and satellite internet. Mara had kept the changes minimal, honoring the spirit of the place while making it more livable. The money from the whistleblower reward had arrived in installments. Not the full $50 million, but enough to secure her future several times over. She'd used some of it to establish a foundation, the Ridgeline Truth and Reconciliation Fund, dedicated to supporting families affected by Operation Pinecone, medical monitoring, financial assistance, college scholarships for descendants of victims. It was Morrison's idea, but Mara had embraced it. The hearings had been brutal. Months of testimony, cross-examination, media scrutiny. Mara's face had been on every major news network. The mountain woman who exposed government murder. Donkey leads to $50 million cover-up. Hero or troublemaker. The Mara Hollis story. She'd hated every minute of it, but she'd survived. And more importantly, so had the truth. 17 former government officials had been charged with conspiracy and obstruction. 8 had taken plea deals. The rest were awaiting trial. The documents from Container 7 had opened investigations into dozens of other classified programs, revealing a network of illegal testing that spanned decades. Not everyone was grateful. Mara received threats regularly, anonymous letters, angry phone calls, cars driving slowly past the property. Morrison had assigned protection, but Mara had declined. She'd learned to trust the mountain's isolation again, and she'd learned that some fights were worth the danger. Today, though it was quiet, peaceful, the kind of day that reminded her why she'd stayed. She stood on her porch, coffee warming her hands, watching Jasper graze peacefully in the clearing. He'd become something of a celebrity himself. The donkey who'd refused to drink contaminated water and accidentally exposed a government conspiracy. Journalists still wanted to photograph him. Children sent him fan letters. He remained magnificently indifferent to it all. A vehicle climbed the access road, not the black SUVs that had haunted her nightmares. A simple Ranger truck. Eleanor Van stepped out, carrying a basket covered with cloth. Thought you might want some company, the librarian said. And fresh bread. Mara smiled, genuinely pleased. She'd reconnected with the town in ways she'd never expected. The isolation that had once been necessary had become optional. She could choose when to be alone and when to let people in. It was a luxury she'd never appreciated before. They sat on the porch together, sharing bread and coffee, watching the mountain wake up to spring. Snow still capped the highest peaks, but green was returning to the valleys. New growth, new life. The town council voted last night, Eleanor said. "They're naming the new community center after your grandmother." Mara's throat tightened. She never even knew about the testing. She died before I found any of this. No, but she lived through it. She was one of the survivors. Eleanor touched Mara's hand gently. "The Hollis Family Community Center. For healing and remembering. They want you at the dedication ceremony next month." Mara nodded, unable to speak. They sat in comfortable silence. Two mountain women who understood that some things didn't need words. Eventually, Eleanor stood to leave. "You did good, Mara. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but you gave this town back its history. The ugly parts and the important parts. That takes courage." After she left, Mara walked down to the creek. The water ran clear and cold, untainted now by secrets buried in its banks. She knelt at the edge, cupping water in her hands and letting it spill through her fingers. Jasper wandered over, lowering his head to drink deeply. Mara laughed. The sound carrying across the valley. "Now you trust it," she said. "Now that the hard work is done." The donkey snorted, water dripping from his muzzle, completely unbothered by her commentary. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked around at her land, the place she'd fled to in grief, the place that had held her through loss, the place that had trusted her with truth when she thought she had nothing left to offer the world. She'd found more than gold in this creek. She'd found purpose. She'd found her voice. She'd found the courage to stand up against people who thought power and money made them untouchable. And she'd learned that sometimes the mountain gives us exactly what we need, even when we don't know we're looking for it. Mara pulled out her phone. She had self-service now, another small luxury, and scrolled through her messages. Interview requests from journalists, updates from Morrison about the trials, thank you notes from families who'd finally learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths. And one new message that made her pause. From Ben Garrett. "Well done, Mara. The mountain chose wisely." She smiled and typed a reply. "The donkey chose wisely. I just listened." As she walked back to her cabin, Jasper following faithfully behind, Mara felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Peace. Not the peace of hiding. Not the peace of surrender. The peace of knowing she'd done something that mattered. Something that would outlive her. Something that gave meaning to all the years of isolation and grief. The mountain had called her here for a reason, and she'd answered. The dedication ceremony for the Hollis Family Community Center drew people from across 3 counties. Mara stood near the back, uncomfortable with the attention, but present because it mattered, because her grandmother's name mattered, because the truth mattered. The building itself was beautiful, modern but respectful, designed to honor the past while serving the future. Inside, a memorial wall listed the names of everyone who died from exposure during Operation Pinecone. 73 confirmed victims, probably more who'd never been identified. Each name was engraved carefully, permanently, never to be forgotten again. Morrison stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. This center exists because one woman had the courage to ask questions, to dig deeper, to refuse easy money and demand justice instead. She looked directly at Mara. We should all aspire to that kind of integrity. The crowd applauded. Mara felt her face flush. Afterward, people approached her, some with gratitude, some with stories about family members who died mysterious deaths. Some just wanted to shake her hand, to connect with a woman who'd changed their town's history. One elderly woman pressed a photograph into Mara's hands. "That's my brother," she whispered. "He was 7 when he got sick. The doctor said it was leukemia, but they never explained why 3 other kids on our street got it too." Tears streamed down her weathered face. "Thank you for making someone answer for what they did to him." Mara held the woman while she cried, feeling the weight of every name on that memorial wall. This was why she'd stayed, why she'd testified, why she'd endured the media circus and the threats and the endless scrutiny. Because these people deserved to know the truth, deserved to have their grief acknowledged, deserved to understand that their loved ones hadn't just gotten unlucky, they'd been murdered by people who called it science. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Mara found herself standing alone in front of the memorial wall, running her fingers over the engraved names, thinking about the creek where it all started, about Jasper refusing to drink, about the choice she'd made to dig deeper instead of walking away. They told me you'd be here. Mara turned. A young man in his 20s stood behind her, nervous but determined. I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to meet you. My grandmother was one of the victims. She died when my mom was just a kid. We never knew why until your evidence came out. I'm sorry for your loss, Mara said softly. Don't be sorry. Be proud. He smiled. Because of you, we finally got answers. My mom finally got closure. And I finally understood why she always told me to question authority, to never trust people just because they have power. He extended his hand. Thank you, Ms. Hollis, for your courage. They shook hands. He walked away, and Mara stood alone again, thinking about courage. She'd never felt courageous. She felt terrified, overwhelmed, desperate. But maybe that was what courage actually was, being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Her phone buzzed. Morrison. Final trial verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. Maximum sentences. Mara closed her eyes, feeling something loosen in her chest. Justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. She walked out of the community center, into bright afternoon sunlight. Jasper waited in the parking lot, tied to her truck, munching hay with complete disregard for his status as a local hero. Ready to go home? She asked him. He flicked his ears in what she chose to interpret as agreement. The drive back to her mountain cabin felt different now. Not a retreat, not hiding, just home, a place she'd chosen, a place that had chosen her back. When they arrived, Mara found a package on her porch. No return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter was from Ben Garrett. Dear Mara, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, just disappeared. The way people like me do when we've said too much and know too many secrets. But I wanted you to have this photograph. It shows the survey team in 1978, the day before Container 7 went missing. I'm in the back row, third from the left. The young man next to me, with his arm around my shoulders, was your husband, Daniel Hollis. He was part of our security team that summer. A good man who asked too many questions about what we were really doing up there. He died 3 years later on the North Face. The official report called it an accident, but I've always wondered if he climbed that mountain looking for answers we told him didn't exist. If he died still trying to expose what we buried. I think he'd be proud of you, Mara. Proud that you finished what he started. Proud that you had the courage he was building toward. The mountain remembers everything, including the good people who fought for truth. Take care of yourself. And thank your donkey for me. Ben. Mara stared at the photograph with shaking hands. There was Daniel, young and alive and beautiful, standing next to a man who'd helped bury the evidence that would eventually destroy careers and expose mass murder. Had Daniel known? Had he suspected? Was that why he'd been on the North Face that day, searching for something, trying to piece together the truth? She'd spent 12 years believing his death was random, a tragic accident, one of 1,000 ways a mountain could kill you if you weren't careful enough. But maybe it hadn't been random at all. Maybe he'd died protecting the same secrets she'd eventually exposed. Maybe, in some way, she'd finish his work. Mara pressed a photograph to her chest, feeling tears stream down her face. Not grief this time. Something else. Connection. Purpose. The sense that nothing was ever truly random, that the mountain had been holding these secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up. And when she started asking questions about why her donkey wouldn't drink, the mountain had finally been ready to answer. She went inside and placed a photograph on her mantle, next to Daniel's wedding ring and the deed to their land. 3 pieces of proof that some things mattered more than safety or comfort or hiding from pain. Truth mattered. Justice mattered. Standing up mattered, even when it scared you, especially when it scared you. Outside, Jasper brayed softly, calling her back to the present. Mara smiled and walked out to join him, the stubborn donkey who'd refused to drink from a poisoned creek and changed everything. You know what? She said, scratching behind his ears. I think we make a pretty good team. He huffed, unimpressed, and returned to his hay. Mara laughed and looked up at her mountains, ancient, knowing, keeping secrets and revealing them in their own time. She found $50 million in gold. She'd exposed government crimes that had killed dozens of people. She brought justice to victims who'd waited 40 years for someone to care. But the real treasure was simpler than that. She'd found her voice, her purpose, her courage, and she learned that sometimes a mountain gives us exactly what we need, even if we have to dig through fear and danger and buried truths to find it. The sun set slowly over the western peaks, painting the snow gold and pink. Mara stood on her porch, watching the light change, feeling grateful for every difficult choice that had brought her to this moment. She was a mountain woman, a truth teller, a guardian of secrets that needed to be spoken aloud. And she was finally completely at peace with who she'd become. The first snow of November fell soft and silent across the ridge, transforming Mara's world into something clean and new. She stood at her kitchen window, coffee steaming in her hands, watching fat flakes drift past the glass. Jasper was already out in his shelter, unbothered by the weather, his shaggy coat thickening for winter the way it had for 16 years now. 2 years. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. The cabin had changed in small ways. Solar panels on the roof now, a proper well instead of hauling water from the creek, insulated windows that didn't rattle in the wind. But the bones of the place remained the same. Her sanctuary, her fortress, the place where she'd learned to stop running from her past and start facing it head-on. Mara's phone buzzed on the counter. She still wasn't used to having reliable cell service, to being connected to the world beyond her mountain. For 12 years, isolation had been her armor. Now it was just a choice she could make or unmake depending on the day. The message was from Catherine Morrison. Sentencing hearing today. Thought you'd want to know. Final chapter. Mara set down her coffee, her chest tightening. The trials had dragged on for 2 years. Appeals, motions, delays. But today, the last of the defendants from Operation Pinecone would learn their fate. David Crane, the man who'd shown up at her cabin with threats and blood money, would finally hear his sentence. She typed back, "Keep me posted." Then she pulled on her heavy coat and boots and stepped outside into the falling snow. The world was muffled, quieter even than usual. Mara walked a familiar path to the creek, her boots leaving the first tracks in fresh powder. The place where she'd found the container looked peaceful now. Just another bend in the water, indistinguishable from any other section of stream bank. But Mara knew what had been buried here, what secrets the mountain had held for 40 years before trusting her with them. She knelt at the water's edge, watching the current flow clear and cold over smooth stones. Jasper had been right to refuse this water. Animals knew things humans have forgotten. How to sense danger, how to trust instinct, how to read the world beyond what eyes could see. "Thank you," she whispered to the creek, to the mountain, to whatever force had guided her donkey to that contaminated stream bank 2 years ago, for trusting me with the truth. The snow fell harder, accumulating on her shoulders, in her hair. Mara didn't move. She let the cold seep through her coat, grounding her in the present moment. So much had changed. So much had been revealed. And yet, standing here, she felt the same peace she'd found that day a year ago at the community center dedication. She'd done what needed doing. The rest was just living with the consequences. The hearing happened at 2 o'clock Mountain Time. Mara didn't watch the live stream. She'd had enough of courtrooms and cameras to last a lifetime. Instead, she worked outside, splitting wood for the stove, her rhythm steady and meditative. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, kept her from spiraling into the what-ifs and should-haves that still occasionally haunted her sleep. Jasper watched from his shelter, dozing in the warmth of fresh hay. At 4:30, her phone rang. Morrison's name flashed on the screen. Mara set down the axe and answered. How bad? 20 years. No parole eligibility for 12. Morrison's voice carried satisfaction and exhaustion in equal measure. The judge called it a systematic betrayal of public trust resulting in preventable deaths. She didn't hold back. Mara leaned against the woodpile, processing. 20 years. Crane would be in his 70s before he saw freedom again. if he lived that long. The families, she asked. Standing ovation when the sentence came down. Some were crying. Some were angry it wasn't longer. Morrison paused. But most seemed relieved, like they could finally close this chapter. Can they? Can any of us? Silence stretched between them. Then Morrison said quietly, "No, but we can live with it now. That's something." After they hung up, Mara stood in the falling snow, feeling the weight of 2 years settle on her shoulders. 73 confirmed victims, 17 people charged, 8 plea deals, 9 convictions, sentences ranging from probation to 20 years, numbers that represented lives destroyed, families shattered, justice delayed but finally, imperfectly delivered. She looked up at the darkening sky, snowflakes catching on her eyelashes. "It's done," she whispered to Daniel, to her grandmother, to all the ghosts this mountain held. "It's finally done." 3 years after discovery. Spring came late that year, snow lingering in the high country well into May. But when it finally arrived, it came with an explosion of wildflowers that painted the meadows in colors Mara had almost forgotten existed. Purple lupin, yellow balsam root, red paintbrush scattered like promises across the hillsides. The Hollis Family Community Center had been open for 2 years now, and Mara had finally started accepting invitations to visit. Not often. She still valued her solitude, still needed the mountain's quiet to stay centered, but enough to feel connected to the town in ways that felt healthy rather than suffocating. Today she was scheduled to speak to a high school class. Morrison had asked her months ago, and Mara had almost refused. What did she know about inspiring teenagers? What wisdom could a woman who'd spent 12 years hiding from the world offer kids just starting their lives? But Eleanor had convinced her. They need to see what courage looks like, the librarian had said. Not the Hollywood version. The real kind. The scared, uncertain, doing it anyway kind. So Mara found herself standing in front of 30 juniors and seniors, all staring at her, with varying degrees of interest, skepticism, and boredom. She prepared notes. Thrown them away. Prepared different notes. Thrown those away, too. In the end, she just told them the truth. 3 years ago, I was barely surviving, she began. I lived alone on a mountain because I couldn't face people anymore. My husband had died, and I convinced myself that isolation was healing when really it was just another way of giving up. She paused, meeting their eyes. I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to contribute. A girl in the front row leaned forward, genuinely listening. Then my donkey refused a drink from a creek, and everything changed. Mara smiled at the absurdity of it. Not because I went looking for change. Not because I had some grand plan to expose government corruption, but because I paid attention when something felt wrong. She told them about finding the container, about the fear when she realized what she discovered, about the phone calls and the threats, and the moment she had to choose between safety and truth. I'm not a hero, she said firmly. I was terrified the entire time. I wanted to run. I wanted to bury that container again and pretend I'd never found it. She gripped the podium. But I kept thinking about the families who'd lost people and never knew why, about the children who'd gotten sick and died, while powerful men called their deaths acceptable losses. The classroom had gone completely silent. So I made a choice, not a brave choice, a necessary one. I decided that some truths matter more than my comfort, more than my safety, more than my desire to hide from the world. A boy in the back raised his hand. Do you regret it? Would you do it differently if you could go back? Mara considered the question seriously. I regret the years I wasted hiding. I regret that I can't give those families their loved ones back. I regret that justice came so late for so many people. She paused. But finding that container? Exposing what happened? No, I don't regret that at all. Another student asked, how did you know you were doing the right thing? Like, in the moment, how did you know? I didn't, Mara admitted. I was making it up as I went along, terrified I'd make the wrong choice and get myself or someone else killed. She smiled sadly. But I had good people helping me. Agent Morrison, Ben Garrett, even Eleanor from the library. And I trusted my gut. When David Crane offered me $10 million to walk away, my gut told me that much money was the price of silence about something that mattered. The teacher stood. One more question, then we need to let Miss Hollis go. A quiet girl near the window raised her hand tentatively. What would you tell someone who feels like they can't make a difference? Like the problems are too big and they're too small? Mara's throat tightened. That was the question, wasn't it? The one that had defined her 20s and 30s, that had driven her into isolation, that had almost prevented her from seeing the truth when it literally surfaced in her own creek. I'd tell them that I thought the same thing, she said softly. For 12 years, I believed I was too small, too broken, too irrelevant to matter. And then a donkey wouldn't drink water, and I paid attention, and that small act of curiosity led to justice for 73 families. She looked around the room at all these young faces, these people just beginning to figure out who they were and what they believed. You're not too small. The problems aren't too big. You just have to pay attention when something feels wrong and have the courage to ask why. She paused. And maybe have a stubborn donkey who refuses to ignore his instincts. The class laughed, the tension breaking. As Mara left the school, students stopped her in the hallway. Some wanted selfies. She'd become oddly famous, her face recognizable from countless news stories. Some wanted to shake her hand. One girl pressed a folded note into her palm and hurried away before Mara could respond. In her truck, Mara unfolded the note. My dad died when I was 6. Doctor said it was cancer, but couldn't explain why. Your investigation finally gave my mom answers. Thank you for caring about people you never met. You gave us closure we didn't know we needed. Sarah T. Mara sat in the parking lot, crying quietly, holding that note like a lifeline. This was why it mattered. This was why she'd endured the fear and the threats and the endless scrutiny. For girls like Sarah who deserved to know the truth about why their fathers died. For families who deserved closure. For a community that deserved to understand its own history. 4 years after discovery, the documentary premiered at a film festival in Denver. Mara hadn't wanted to attend. Cameras and crowds still made her uncomfortable, but Morrison convinced her it was important. People need to see you, the agent had said, not as a symbol or a headline, but as a real person, someone who was scared and did the right thing anyway. So Mara found herself sitting in a packed theater, watching her life unfold on a massive screen. The filmmakers had done their research. Interviews with victims' families, footage from the trials, dramatic reenactments of key moments. They'd even gotten Jasper on camera, the donkey tolerating the film crew with his usual indifference. The scene where Mara opened the container for the first time was particularly well done, capturing the fear and wonder and dawning horror of what she'd found. The actress playing her looked nothing like Mara, but somehow she'd captured the essence. The isolation, the grief, the reluctant courage. When the credits rolled, the audience applauded. Long and loud. People stood. Mara sat frozen, overwhelmed by the attention. Morrison leaned over. You need to say something. They want to hear from you. I don't know what to say. The truth. You're good at that. So Mara stood, walking in front of the theater on shaking legs. The applause continued. She waited for it to fade, then spoke into the microphone someone handed her. I don't feel like the person in that film, she admitted. She seems braver than I remember being. More certain, more heroic. She paused. The truth is, I spent most of those months terrified. I made mistakes. I almost walked away a dozen times. I'm not special or extraordinary. She looked out at the sea of faces. But I was paying attention when my donkey acted strange. And I kept paying attention even when powerful people told me to stop. That's all it took. Attention and stubbornness, and a refusal to let fear make my decisions. A man in the audience called out, What would you tell people who want to make a difference but don't know how? Mara smiled. Start small. Pay attention to what feels wrong. Ask questions when things don't make sense. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. She thought of Jasper refusing to drink. And listen to animals. They know things we've forgotten. The audience laughed. Another voice. Do you feel safe now? Knowing there are still people angry about what you exposed. No, Mara said honestly. I get threats. I'm careful about where I go and who knows my schedule. But I'm safer than the 73 people who died without anyone knowing why. Safer than their families who live with unanswered questions for decades. She straightened. Fear is just part of the price. I'm willing to pay it. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Mara answered as honestly as she could, fighting the urge to flee back to her mountain where things made sense and people didn't stare. Afterward, during the reception, families approached her, the elderly woman who'd given her a photograph at the community center dedication, the quiet girl from the high school class, Morrison's team members who'd helped secure the evidence, Ben Garrett's daughter. Mara hadn't even known he had children, who wanted to thank her for giving her father's story meaning. He died 6 months ago, the woman said quietly. Lung cancer. But before he died, he told me everything about Operation Pinecone, about the guilt he'd carried for 40 years, about how you gave him a chance to make it right. Tears streamed down her face. You gave my father peace. Thank you. Mara held her while she cried, thinking about all the ways truth rippled outward, touching lives she'd never meet, healing wounds she didn't know existed. 5 years after discovery. The 5th anniversary of finding the container fell on a Tuesday in late October. Mara had been dreading it. Journalists wanted interviews. The community center planned a commemoration event. Morrison was pushing for a press conference. Mara wanted none of it. She spent the day alone on her mountain, walking the familiar trails with Jasper, remembering the woman she'd been 5 years ago. Isolated, grieving, convinced her life had no purpose beyond survival. That woman felt like a stranger now. Mara stopped at the creek, at the exact spot where she'd dug a container. Someone, probably Eleanor or the community center staff, had placed a small memorial plaque nearby. Here, in October 2019, Mara Hollis discovered evidence that brought justice to 73 victims of Operation Pinecone. The mountain remembers. So will we. Mara touched the plaque, cold metal under her fingertips. The mountain remembers. It was true. Mountains held secrets longer than human memory could sustain. They witnessed crimes and kept silence until someone brave or stubborn enough came along to ask the right questions. Her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made her pause. Sarah T., the girl from a high school class 4 years ago, the one whose father had died of mysterious cancer when she was 6. Mara answered. Hello, Ms. Hollis? It's Sarah Thompson. I don't know if you remember me. I remember the note you gave me about your father. Oh, good. The girl, young woman now, probably in college, sounded nervous. I wanted to thank you. My mom got a settlement from the compensation fund. It's not a lot, but it's helping her finally get treatment for the PTSD she's had since Dad died. Mara's chest tightened. The compensation fund had been established 2 years ago, funded by recovered assets from criminal cases and contributions from guilty parties as part of plea deals. It wasn't much. Money could never replace lost lives, but it helped with medical bills, therapy, education costs. I'm glad she's getting help, Mara said. That's not why I called, though. Sarah paused. I'm studying environmental science now. I want to work for the EPA, investigating contamination cases. I want to help other communities that might be dealing with cover-ups like what happened here. Mara felt tears sting her eyes. Sarah, that's wonderful. I wouldn't be doing it if you hadn't shown me that one person can make a difference. That asking questions matters. That truth matters even when it's uncomfortable. Her voice wavered. So thank you for everything, for giving my family answers, for inspiring me to fight for other families. After they hung up, Mara sat on a fallen log, crying quietly in the autumn sunshine. This was the real legacy, not the headlines or the documentary or the awards she'd received, but Sarah choosing a path of truth and justice. Other young people seeing what one scared woman and a stubborn donkey had accomplished and deciding they could do the same. Jasper wandered over, nudging her shoulder with his nose. We did good, didn't we? She whispered to him. He huffed, unimpressed by sentiment, and returned to grazing. Mara laughed through her tears. Some things never changed. Jasper would always be more interested in hay than heroism. and she would always be more comfortable on a mountain than in front of cameras. But she'd learned something important. You didn't have to change who you were to make a difference. You just had to pay attention and refuse to look away when you saw something wrong. 6 years after discovery, the letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, forwarded through Morrison because Mara still didn't publish her address publicly. The return address showed a federal prison in Colorado. Mara stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, a single page in careful handwriting. Dear Ms. Hollis, you don't know me, but I was part of the Operation Pinecone support staff in 1974 to 1975. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, working as a lab technician. I didn't know what we were really doing. I was told we were conducting legitimate medical research, that all participants had consented, that we were helping advance science. I was naive, or maybe I was willfully blind. Either way, I participated in something monstrous, and I've carried that guilt for 50 years. When you expose the truth, I turned myself in, testified against the others, provided documentation I'd kept hidden all these years because some part of me always knew it was wrong and might someday matter. I'm serving 8 years. I'll be 73 when I'm released, if I live that long. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your courage gave me the courage to finally tell the truth, to stop hiding behind fear and self-preservation, to face what I'd done and accept the consequences. There are others like me, people who participated in small ways, who told themselves they were just following orders, who buried their guilt for decades. Your investigation gave us permission to finally speak up. So thank you for being braver than I ever was, for refusing to let the powerful bury their crimes, for giving victims the justice they deserved. Margaret Chun. Mara read the letter 3 times, feeling complicated emotions twist through her chest. This woman had helped poison children, had participated, however unknowingly, in their deaths. She deserved punishment, but she'd also found the courage to confess, to testify, to help build the case that had brought justice to so many families. Mara pulled out her own stationery. She kept it now for occasional correspondence with victims' families and other people touched by the case. She wrote, Dear Margaret, thank you for your letter and for your testimony. I can't offer forgiveness for crimes committed against people I never knew, families I have no right to speak for. That's between you and them. But I can tell you this. Turning yourself in took courage. Testifying took courage. Accepting responsibility instead of hiding behind age or ignorance took courage. You can't undo what was done. None of us can. But you chose truth over comfort. That matters. I hope your remaining years, in prison and after, bring you some measure of peace. Mara Hollis. She mailed the letter that afternoon, unsure if she'd done the right thing, but certain that Margaret Chin deserved acknowledgement for choosing truth after 50 years of silence. This was what real justice looked like. Messy, complicated, full of people who'd made terrible choices and were trying, belatedly, to make better ones. Not the clean narrative of heroes and villains that documentaries and news stories preferred, but something more honest, more human. 8 years after discovery, Mara woke on her 55th birthday to find snow falling again. The world transformed into a quiet white landscape she'd loved for 20 years now. She made coffee, fed Jasper, and sat on her porch watching the sun rise through the storm. 8 years since that October day when everything changed. Morrison had retired from the FBI last year, settling in Ridgeline and becoming a regular fixture at Mackenzie's bar, swapping stories with locals who'd lived through the testing era. They'd become unlikely friends. 2 women who'd dedicated years to exposing truth and were now trying to figure out what came after. Eleanor had passed away 6 months ago, peacefully in her sleep at 87. Mara had spoken at the funeral, talking about the librarian who'd helped her understand her discovery, who'd given her the documents and support she needed to keep asking questions. The town was different now, more open, less willing to accept official explanations without evidence. The younger generation, kids like Sarah Thompson, asked hard questions and expected honest answers. The mountain was the same, ancient, patient, holding its secrets until the right moment. The right person, the right stubborn donkey came along. Mara's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She'd been getting better about ignoring calls, about protecting her peace. But the number was local. Hello, Mara? It's Tom Buckley, from the community center. A pause. We've had a situation. Some researchers from the university found documents suggesting there might be another container, somewhere in the Northern Valley. Mara's stomach dropped. Another one? Maybe. The records are fragmentary. But we thought, given your experience, he trailed off awkwardly. Would you be willing to consult? Help us figure out if we should be looking. And if so, where? Mara closed her eyes. 8 years. 8 years of relative peace. No more digging. No more terrifying discoveries. No more threats from powerful people with too much to hide. She could say no. She'd earned the right to refuse. To protect her peace. To let someone else carry this burden. But then she thought about the families who'd waited 40 years for answers. About Sarah choosing environmental science. About Margaret Chin finding the courage to confess. About all the people whose lives had changed because one woman paid attention when her donkey wouldn't drink. I'll help, she said, but on my terms. No media circus. No press conferences. Just quiet investigation. Agreed. Thank you, Mara. I know this isn't easy. It never is, she interrupted. But some things matter more than easy. After hanging up, Mara sat for a long time, watching snow accumulate on the railing. Jasper stood in his shelter, watching her with knowing eyes. What do you think? She asked him. Ready for another adventure? The donkey snorted and returned his hay. Mara, because this was who she was now. Not the isolated, grieving widow hiding from the world. Not even the reluctant hero the media had made her into. She was a woman who paid attention when things felt wrong. Who asked questions powerful people didn't want asked. Who trusted donkeys and instincts and the mountain's wisdom. She was someone who understood that truth mattered. That justice, however delayed, was worth fighting for. That one person, even a scared, uncertain person living alone on a mountain, could make a difference. The snow fell harder, erasing her tracks from earlier that morning, creating a blank page, a fresh start. Mara stood, stretching muscles that ached a little more than they used to. 55 wasn't old, but it wasn't young either. She'd need to be smarter this time, more careful, maybe bring a team instead of working alone. But she'd do it, because another container meant more victims, more families without answers, more truth buried and waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig it up. She walked inside, pulling out her old notebooks, the ones where she documented every detail of finding Container 7, the maps Eleanor had given her, the contacts she'd made, researchers, journalists, lawyers, advocates, a network built over 8 years of asking questions and refusing to stop. This time, she wouldn't be alone. This time, she'd have help from people who believed in truth as fiercely as she did. Mara called Morrison. Did you hear about the Northern Valley? Just got the call. I was about to phone you. Want to go digging? Morrison laughed, the sound tired but game. At our age, we're going to regret this. Probably, but we'll regret not looking more. Fair point. When do we start? Tomorrow. I need today to prepare. After they hung up, Mara spent the rest of her birthday organizing supplies, reviewing documents, planning the search. It felt familiar and strange at once, like putting on an old coat that still fit, but carried memories of battles fought and won. As evening fell and the snow finally stopped, Mara stood on her porch one more time, looking out at her mountain, the place that had saved her, the place that had trusted her with its secrets, the place that apparently wasn't done with her yet. All right, she whispered to the darkness. I'm listening. Show me what you need me to find. The mountain didn't answer, but Mara had learned to read its silences, to understand that sometimes the most important conversations happen in the spaces between words. Tomorrow she would search for another container, another buried truth, another chance to bring justice to people who deserved it. But tonight she would rest, gather her strength, remember who she was and why this mattered. She was Mara Hollis, the woman who'd found $50 million in gold and chosen truth over fortune. The woman who'd exposed government crimes and survived the consequences. The woman who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing despite being terrified. And if the mountain needed her again, she would answer, because some debts could only be paid forward. Some truths only mattered if someone was willing to speak them. And some mountains only gave up their secrets to people stubborn enough to keep asking questions. Mara smiled and went inside, ready for whatever came next. The mountain remembered everything. So would she. The days following the FBI's arrival passed in a controlled chaos that Mara struggled to process. Her small cabin became a waypoint for federal agents, forensic teams, and document specialists who treated the container like an archaeological discovery, which, in a sense, it was. Morrison had been true to her word. The investigation proceeded with methodical precision. Every piece of evidence was photographed, cataloged, and secured according to protocols designed to withstand the scrutiny of defense attorneys and appeals courts. The gold bars were removed one by one, each weighed and tested. The document cases were handled with gloved hands and transported in climate-controlled containers. But it was the metal tubes, the ones marked with radiation warnings, that caused the most concern. A hazmat team arrived on the third day, specialists in their white suits moving with careful deliberation around the container. Mara watched from a distance, Jasper beside her, both of them excluded from the immediate area by yellow tape and stern warnings. "What are they finding?" she asked Morrison, who stood nearby with a tablet full of real-time updates. The agent's expression was grim. "Exactly what we feared. Those tubes contained samples, soil, water, biological materials from the test sites, all contaminated, all carefully preserved as evidence of what was done here, evidence they tried to destroy, evidence they tried to hide," Morrison corrected. "There's a difference. Destroying it would have been smarter. But someone, probably whoever buried this container, wanted proof to survive, just in case." In case of what? In case their conscience caught up with them. In case the cover-up failed. In case someone like you came along and asked the right questions. Morrison looked at her seriously. Whoever hid this container wasn't just trying to steal government property. They were creating insurance. Leverage against the people who'd ordered these tests. Mara thought about Ben Garrett, the voice on the phone who'd warned her about Crane, the man who claimed to have helped bury the container in 1978. Had he been trying to protect evidence even while participating in the cover-up? Had he known that someday, somehow, this truth needed to come out? "Do you think Garrett is still alive?" she asked. Morrison shrugged. "We've been looking for him for 2 years. If he's alive, he's very good at staying hidden." By the end of the first week, the immediate area around Mara's property looked like a cross between a crime scene and a scientific research station. Temporary structures housed equipment and personnel. Generators hummed constantly, powering lights and computers and testing equipment. The intrusion should have bothered Mara more than it did. For 12 years, she'd guarded her solitude fiercely. But watching these people work, dedicated professionals pursuing truth with the same determination she'd felt when she first opened that container, filled her with something unexpected. Hope. Hope that justice might actually prevail. That the powerful might actually face consequences, that the victims and their families might finally receive acknowledgement and compensation. Eleanor visited on the 8th day, climbing the mountain road in her ancient sedan with a determination that made Mara smile. The librarian brought food, real food, not the freeze-dried meals and protein bars Mara had been surviving on, and insisted they eat together in the cabin, away from the chaos outside. "The town is buzzing," Eleanor said, serving homemade stew into chip bowls. Half excited, half terrified. "Everyone's wondering what this means. If there were more tests than we knew about, if more people were affected." Morrison says the documents show the testing program was larger than anyone suspected. Not just this valley. Multiple sites across 3 states. Eleanor's face paled. "How many victims?" "They're still counting. But hundreds, at least. Maybe more." The librarian set down her spoon, hands trembling. "My sister died in 1973. She was 19. The doctor said it was a brain tumor, but it came on so fast, so aggressive. She was healthy 1 month and gone 3 months later. She looked up, eyes wet. Do you think... Mara reached across the table, taking her hand. I think the documents will tell us. And if your sister was one of the victims, her name will be added to the memorial. She'll be remembered. They ate in silence for a while, the weight of decades pressing down on them. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. What you've done, Mara, what you're still doing, it matters more than you know. People in town have been living with ghosts for 50 years. Losses they couldn't explain. Illnesses that made no sense. Questions no one would answer. I didn't do anything special. I just... Don't. Eleanor interrupted firmly. Don't diminish what you've done. You could have taken Crane's money. You could have walked away. You could have let powerful men bury this truth for another 40 years. She squeezed Mara's hand. But you didn't. You stood up. And because you did, hundreds of families are going to get answers. Justice. Closure. After Eleanor left, Mara stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The FBI teams were winding down for the day, securing equipment, preparing for another round of evidence collection tomorrow. Morrison approached, looking exhausted but satisfied. We found something, the agent said quietly, in the third document case. A complete list of everyone who participated in Operation Pinecone. Scientists, administrators, security personnel, medical staff. Over 200 names. Mara's pulse quickened, including the people who ordered it, including everyone, with detailed notes about their roles, their knowledge of what was happening, their complicity in the cover-up. Morrison's smile was fierce. This isn't just evidence of the testing program. It's a roadmap to everyone who needs to be held accountable. How many are still alive? We're working on that. But preliminary research suggests at least 60 individuals who participated in or covered up Operation Pinecone are still living. Some are retired. Some are still in government positions. Some are wealthy, respected members of their communities. And now they're going to face justice. If we do this right, yes. Morrison paused. But, Mara, you need to understand, this is going to get worse before it gets better. When we start making arrests, when this goes public, the backlash will be intense. These people have money and power and connections. They'll fight back. Let them, Mara said quietly. I've already survived the worst they can do. Morrison looked doubtful, but didn't argue. The media storm broke on day 12. Despite Morrison's best efforts to keep the investigation quiet, word leaked. Within hours, news vans were climbing the mountain road. Reporters with cameras and microphones setting up camp at the base of Mara's property, where the FBI had established a perimeter. Helicopters circled overhead, filming the FBI operation from above. Mara's cell phone exploded with calls and messages, journalists, book publishers, documentary filmmakers, people claiming to be victims' family members, conspiracy theorists, and threats. So many threats. Morrison arranged a press conference at the FBI field office in Denver, hoping to control the narrative. Mara refused to attend. Instead, she stayed on her mountain, watching the circus unfold on her laptop via livestream. Morrison stood at the podium, flanked by other federal agents and officials from the Department of Justice. 2 weeks ago, the agent began, we recovered evidence of a classified government testing program known as Operation Pinecone. This program, which ran from 1962 to 1975, conducted unauthorized medical experiments on American citizens without their knowledge or consent. The assembled reporters erupted in questions. Morrison waited for silence. The evidence we recovered includes detailed documentation of these experiments, samples of contaminated materials, financial records showing how the program was funded, and a comprehensive list of everyone involved in its planning, execution, and subsequent cover-up. More shouting. Morrison's expression remained stern. We are in the process of identifying victims and notifying their families. We are pursuing criminal charges against surviving participants who broke federal laws. And we are coordinated with other agencies to determine if similar programs operated in other locations. A reporter yelled out, "How is this evidence found?" Morrison paused. seeming to choose her words carefully. A private citizen discovered buried materials on her property and reported them to federal authorities. That citizen has chosen to remain anonymous, and we will respect her privacy. Mara snorted, as if anonymity was still possible. Her name had been leaked within hours of the FBI's arrival. Her face was already circulating on social media, pulled from old photos and grainy security footage from town. The press conference continued for another hour. Morrison deflected questions about Mara, refused to provide specific names of people being investigated, and declined to estimate the total number of victims. But the damage, or rather, the exposure, was done. By evening, Operation Pinecone was trending on social media. News anchors were comparing it to Tuskegee and MK Ultra. Victims' advocacy groups were demanding congressional hearings. Politicians were rushing to issue statements condemning the program and praising the investigation. And Mara's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Finally, she turned it off completely, severing her connection to the chaos. She sat in her darkening cabin, listening to the distant hum of generators and the closer sound of Jasper munching hay. The door opened. Morrison, looking haggard. "You should have told me you were leaking my name," Mara said without turning around. "I didn't. But in an investigation this size, with this many people involved, secrecy was always impossible." The agent sat down heavily. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted privacy." Wanted, past tense. Mara finally looked at her. "What happens now? Now we build cases, make arrests, prepare for trials that will probably take years." Morrison rubbed her face. "And you become the face of this story, whether you want to be or not. The woman who exposed government crimes. The whistleblower. The hero. I'm not a hero. Tell that to the families who've been waiting 50 years for someone to care about what happened to their loved ones." The arrest began 3 weeks after Container's recovery. The first was a retired scientist living in Arizona, a man in his 80s who'd overseen the medical testing protocols. Footage of him being led from his assisted living facility in handcuffs played on every major news network. Then a former administrator from the Department of Defense. Then a doctor who'd falsified medical records. Then security personnel who'd helped conceal evidence. Each arrest brought new media attention. Each booking photo revealed aging faces. People who lived entire lives free from consequences, enjoying careers and families in retirement while their victims remain in unmarked graves or struggle with unexplained illnesses. Public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of the prosecutions. Protesters gathered outside courthouses demanding justice. Victims' families organized, hiring lawyers, preparing civil suits. Congress announced hearings. But there was also backlash. Conservative media outlets questioned the investigation's timing and motives. Some suggested it was politically motivated. Others argued that the participants had been following orders and didn't deserve punishment for doing their jobs 50 years ago. And then came the threats against Mara. The first arrived by mail, a letter filled with vicious accusations and promises of violence. Morrison had it analyzed, traced, and used as evidence in a harassment case. But more letters came. Emails, social media messages, phone calls to the few numbers Mara hadn't changed. Some were probably empty threats from angry keyboard warriors, but others felt more serious, detailed, specific enough that Morrison assigned protection. 2 agents living in a trailer on Mara's property, monitoring access, running security protocols. Mara hated it, hated the loss of privacy, the constant surveillance, the reminder that speaking truth had made her a target. But she endured it because the alternative, silence, retreat, giving the people who wanted her afraid exactly what they wanted, was unacceptable. For months after finding Container, Mara was finally allowed to return to something resembling normal life. The FBI had completed their on-site work, removing equipment and personnel. The protective detail was scaled back to periodic check-ins rather than constant presence. The media attention hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified as trials began, but Mara had learned to ignore it. She refused interview requests, declined book deals, rejected offers to speak at conferences and universities. She just wanted to be left alone. But the mountain that had once offered pure isolation now felt different, changed, as if the act of exposing its buried secrets had transformed the relationship between place and person. Mara walked the familiar trails with Jasper, tried to recapture the peace she'd once found here. But everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of what happened. The creek where the container was buried, the ridges where test sites had operated, the valleys where victims had lived and died. The mountain remembered. And now, so did everyone else. Eleanor visited regularly, bringing news from town and companionship that Mara was learning to appreciate. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat together on the porch, watching weather move across the peaks, sharing the silence of people who understood that some truths were too heavy for constant discussion. One afternoon, Eleanor brought something different, a package wrapped carefully, with Mara's name written in unfamiliar handwriting. "This came to the library," the librarian explained. "Addressed to you, care of the Historical Society. I opened it, sorry, but given the threats you've been receiving, I wanted to make sure it was safe." Mara took the package carefully. "What is it?" "Letters. Dozens of them. From families of victims. People thanking you for what you've done." Mara's hands trembled as she unwrapped the package. Inside were envelopes, some neat, some crumpled, some with tear stains visible on the paper. She opened the first one randomly. "Dear Ms. Hollis, my mother died in 1968 when I was 4 years old. For 56 years, my father told me she died of natural causes, a sudden illness the doctors couldn't explain. He never remarried, never talked about her, except to say she was beautiful and kind and taken too soon. Last month, I received a call from the FBI. They told me my mother's name was on the list of Operation Pinecone victims, that she'd been exposed to chemical agents during what she thought was a routine health screening at the local clinic, that her death wasn't natural or mysterious. It was murder. My father died 10 years ago, still not knowing the truth. I'm glad he didn't have to learn what was done to her. But I'm grateful, so grateful that I finally know that her name will be on the memorial, that the people who killed her are facing justice. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for refusing to look away. Thank you for giving my mother's death meaning by making sure it wasn't in vain. Robertson." Mara set down the letter with shaking hands. She opened another, then another. Each one told a similar story. Lives cut short, families left with questions, decades of grief made worse by the absence of answers. And now, because of what she'd found, those answers existed. She read every letter that afternoon and into the evening. Some made her cry, some made her angry. All of them reinforced why she'd made the choices she'd made, why she'd endured the fear and threats and exposure. Because these people deserved truth, deserved justice, deserved to know that their loved ones hadn't died randomly or mysteriously, but had been deliberately sacrificed by people who valued data over human life. When she finished the last letter, full darkness had fallen. Eleanor had left quietly at some point, leaving Mara alone with the weight of gratitude from strangers whose lives she'd changed. She walked outside, breathing cold mountain air, looking up at stars scattered across the black sky like promises. "I hope it was enough," she whispered to the night, to Daniel, to all the ghosts this mountain held. "I hope it mattered." The mountain didn't answer, but somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a sound of life continuing, of the world moving forward, of hope persisting even in darkness. 6 months after discovery, the first trial concluded in April. 6 months after Mara had opened the container, the defendant, the retired scientist from Arizona, was found guilty on 17 counts of assault, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He would die in prison. Everyone knew it. The man was 83 years old. But the verdict sent a clear message. Age would not protect perpetrators. Time would not erase accountability. Justice might be delayed, but it would not be denied. Mara watched the verdict announcement on her laptop, Morrison sitting beside her in the cabin. One down. The agent said quietly, 37 to go. 37 remaining defendants. 37 trials to prepare for. Evidence to present. Witnesses to coordinate. Years of legal battles ahead. Mara felt exhausted just thinking about it. "Do you need me to testify at all of them?" she asked. No, your testimony about finding container and the immediate aftermath is relevant to the obstruction charges, but most trials will focus on the actual testing and cover-up. We have documentation for that. Witnesses from the era. Morrison paused. Though having you there sends a powerful message. Reminds the jury that this isn't ancient history. It's evidence that was actively being hidden until someone brave enough came along. Or stupid enough. Morrison smiled. Brave. Definitely brave. That summer, as trials continued and media attention gradually shifted to other stories, Mara began the slow process of reclaiming her life. She established routines again, chopping wood, tending her small garden, hiking with Jasper. The protective detail had been reduced to weekly check-ins after several arrests reduced the threat level. She was learning to live with her new reality. The recognition from strangers when she went to town. The mixture of gratitude and resentment people directed at her. Grateful for exposing the truth. Resentful that the exposure had shattered their community's carefully maintained myths about the past. Some people in Ridgeline treated her like a hero. Others avoided her, uncomfortable with the truth she represented. A few were openly hostile, angry that she'd stirred up trouble and brought unwanted attention to their quiet town. Mara understood. Truth was uncomfortable. It disrupted narratives people had built their identities around. It forced acknowledgement of complicity and silence in the ways ordinary people had failed to ask questions when questions desperately needed asking. She didn't expect everyone to be grateful. She just expected them to face reality. One afternoon, while shopping for supplies at the general store, an elderly man approached her. Mara recognized him vaguely. Someone she'd seen around town over the years, never spoken to. "You're Hollis," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." "You ruined my family." His voice shook with rage. "My father was on that list. He was a good man. He was following orders. He didn't deserve to die in prison." Mara met his eyes steadily. "Your father helped poison children. Whatever else he was, good father, good neighbor, good man in other ways, he did that, and he spent 50 years helping hide it. He was protecting his family, protecting his career. What was he supposed to do? Tell the truth, accept responsibility, help the victims instead of hiding the crimes." Mara's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm sorry your father faced consequences, but I'm sorrier for the people he helped kill, for the families who lived with unanswered questions while he enjoyed his freedom." The man's face crumpled. For a moment, Mara thought he might hit her. Instead, he turned and walked away, shoulders shaking with sobs. She stood in the aisle, surrounded by canned goods and cleaning supplies, feeling the weight of what she'd done settle over her again. She destroyed this man's image of his father, shattered the comfortable lies that had allowed him to think of his family as blameless. It was necessary destruction, but that didn't make it hurt less. Eleanor found her there 10 minutes later, still standing frozen. "I saw what happened," the librarian said gently. "That was Marcus Riley. His father was one of the administrators." "I know. He's been struggling since the arrests. His whole identity was built around being the son of a respected scientist. And now he's the son of a war criminal." Eleanor flinched at the harsh assessment, but didn't disagree. "Come on, let's get you home." In the truck, Eleanor spoke quietly. "You know that not everyone will understand what you did. Not everyone will be grateful." "I know. Some people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths." "I know that too." Mara looked out at the mountains rolling past. "But the truth doesn't stop being true just because it's uncomfortable. And those 73 victims deserve better than being forgotten, so their killers could die comfortable." Eleanor nodded. "Just be prepared. The trials are going to bring this up again and again. Every verdict will reopen wounds. Every sentence will make someone angry. You're going to spend years being the face of this investigation. I don't want to be the face of anything. Too late for that. 9 months after discovery, by autumn, the community center's memorial wall was complete. 73 names had become 112 as Morrison's team identified more victims. The list would probably grow further as investigation continued. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for October, 1 year after Mara's initial discovery. She'd been asked to speak. She'd refused multiple times. But Eleanor and Morrison had tag-teamed her, and eventually she'd agreed to say something brief. Very brief. The day arrived cool and clear, mountain autumn at its most beautiful. Hundreds of people gathered, victims' families, town residents, media, federal officials. Morrison was there, along with agents who'd worked the case. Several prosecuted defendants' families attended, their presence tense and unwelcome to many. Mara stood at the back, uncomfortable in the dress Eleanor had helped her pick out, wishing she could disappear into the forest and let someone else speak for her. But when her name was called, she walked to the podium on shaking legs. The crowd went silent. Mara looked out to sea of faces, old and young, grateful and angry, hopeful and grieving. She thought about the letters she'd received, about Robert Chun, who'd finally learned why his mother died, about Sarah Thompson, inspired to fight for environmental justice, about all the people whose lives have been touched by this investigation. "I'm not good at speeches," she began, her voice barely carrying over the microphone. "I'm much better at being alone on a mountain." A few people laughed nervously. "1 year ago, my donkey wouldn't drink from a creek. That's it. That's the only reason any of this happened." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I could have ignored it. Could have assumed he was just being stubborn. Could have walked away when I found something strange." She looked at the memorial wall, at all those names etched in stone. "But I didn't walk away. Because ignoring what feels wrong is how crimes like this happen in the first place. Because looking the other way is how powerful people get away with murder. Because someone had to ask questions." Her voice grew stronger. "These names represent people who deserve better, who trusted doctors and researchers and government officials. And that trust was betrayed in the most horrific ways imaginable. They were experimented on, poisoned, killed, and then forgotten." She met the eyes of people in the crowd. "But they're not forgotten anymore, because of everyone here, because of the families who demanded answers, because of agents like Catherine Morrison who never stopped investigating, because of a community that chose truth over comfortable lies." She stepped back from the podium, ready to flee, but forced herself to finish. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who paid attention when something felt wrong and refused to stop asking questions. That's all any of us need to be. Pay attention. Ask questions. Refuse to look away when it would be easier." She glanced at Jasper, tied to a nearby tree, munching grass with complete indifference to the ceremony. "And maybe listen to your donkey." The crowd laughed, then applauded. Mara left the podium quickly, disappearing into the audience before anyone could stop her for interviews or photos. She found Eleanor waiting near the back. "That was perfect," the librarian whispered. "That was terrifying. Also perfect." After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the media packed up their equipment, Mara slipped away to walk the trails above town. She needed space, needed to breathe air that didn't feel heavy with expectations and grief and the weight of 112 names carved in stone. Jasper followed faithfully, his presence grounding. She climbed to a ridge overlooking the valley, watching sunset paint the world in shades of gold and crimson. From here, she could see the community center, the town spreading out below, the mountains rising in every direction. This was her home, had been for 12 years, would be for however many years remained. But it felt different now. Not worse, exactly, just changed, complicated, a place where she was simultaneously celebrated and resented, where her presence reminded people of truths they'd rather forget. Was it worth it? She asked aloud, not sure who she was talking to. Daniel, maybe, or the mountain itself, or just her own conscience. No answer came, but as darkness fell and stars emerged, Mara felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. Worth it or not, it had been necessary. The truth had needed speaking. The victims had deserved acknowledgement. And someone had to be willing to bear the burden of exposure. That someone had been her. She could live with that.